When I first finished the novel, I was working at an office and I was bringing it in. I think I was doing revisions, or I don't remember why I had it with me. Maybe I printed it out at work. I don't remember, but I had it with me. Oh yeah, that's exactly what it was. I printed it out at the office. Don't tell anyone at that office. And I was talking to one of the interns about it, and she took the manuscript and she flipped to the last page and she read the end and she said, yeah, I would read this book. Now, I'd heard of people doing that. There's a movie called Alex and Emma where one of the main characters does that. I had assumed it had been made up for that film, and maybe it was and this girl took it from there, or maybe this is a thing that certain people do. It doesn't really matter. The point is that for some people, the ending is the first thing they're gonna see. But even beyond that, the ending is the last thing they see. It's pretty important for that reason alone. Last week we talked about the third act of your story, and some people would say that that's the same as talking about the ending. But I say no. New video, talking about endings. I'm Michael Christensen, and we've been doing a whole series on outlining, and today we're gonna bring it all home and talk about your ending. Because I think it's important to separate your ending from Act 3, and I'll tell you why. Act 3 has to do a lot of work. You have to resolve everything that's come so far. You have to bring everything to some sort of conclusion. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the ending is that conclusion. The ending is the last moment you leave your audience with. Act 3 serves to resolve everything that's happened so far in the story. Your ending is what you send your audience home with. The ending is obviously a part of Act 3. It's probably the most important part of Act 3 because it's the most important part of your story. No pressure. They will sometimes like something despite a bad ending. Stephen King has made a whole career out of this. He does not really do endings well consistently. He has some real stinkers out there. I think Stephen King is the exception, not the rule. Especially if you're just starting out like I am, or like you might be. I don't think you get to have a bad ending. Sorry. So it's important to make sure your ending accomplishes some very specific things, and that list depends on what you're trying to do. I'm writing serialized storytelling. I'm starting a series. So my ending has to make the audience excited about the next part. If I'm doing a standalone story, the ending has to be different. The ending has to give you a sense of closure. But your ending still has to have some element of closure, even if you are doing a serialized story. The Star Wars franchise, generally speaking, is a really good example of this. Because at the end of most of those films, not all of them, but most of them, there is some sense of closure, of catharsis, of resolution. Obviously, A New Hope ends with this big ceremony, and they get their medals, and they all cheer, and they're heroes, and that's a really good, solid ending. If that had been the only movie, we all would have been fine. We could have gone home and said, boy, Star Wars, great movie. All of us would have felt that way. Everyone loves Star Wars. Everybody unconditionally loves Star Wars. But even Empire Strikes Back, which is unambiguously a middle part, it definitely has a cliffhanger ending, still has a resolution. At the end of that film, we know the main characters have an objective going forward. They want to rescue Han. They still need to destroy the Empire. And we know that there are questions still to be resolved, such as, what's the deal with the Darth Vader and Luke stuff? What's up with that, all of that? But the film still gives us a sense of resolution. At the end of it, the characters feel happy and optimistic, and the general sense of, well, you know, then we're still going, we're still flying. You still get the traditional Star Wars ending of the family photo. It's just shot from behind instead. And then we get the ships flying off into space, and it gives you a sense that the story is not complete, but there's resolution there. I think a big part of that is actually the fact that we see Luke getting a new hand. And that sounds like an insignificant detail, but it's not. The few things that the main characters are doing at the end of that story is that Lando and Chewbacca are in the Millennium Falcon. They're getting ready to go and find Han. Leia is with Luke, the robots are with Luke, and Luke is getting his hand attached. Now, aside from Lando and Chewie, the other characters are fairly passive, but Luke is doing something to move himself forward. He is getting a new hand. It gives us some closure. It lets us know, hey, he's not just gonna not have a hand, he's getting a prosthesis. That way, when he shows up in the next movie, he doesn't have to not have a hand. We can show him getting one now and be like, oh yeah, he's got a robot hand, that's right. But it's actually more than that. It's an emotional signal to the audience that says, things are still going to be okay. And for a lot of people, I know that is not how they describe the end of The Empire Strikes Back. The general consensus is That movie ends with everyone unhappy, and that's true. But it doesn't end with everyone hopeless, and that is an important distinction. I like the film The Last Jedi. I think it's flawed, but generally pretty good. But I do think the ending doesn't quite accomplish that same threading of the needle. And I don't really know why that is. I think the issue is that we don't have a clear sense of where the main characters are going next. They're just running some more. It's weird because the end of that film is optimistic in the text, the way that Empire Strikes Back isn't. But the feelings are flipped. The Empire Strikes Back still feels cautiously optimistic at the end, but The Last Jedi feels a little conflicted. At least that's the takeaway I get from it. Yes, we have all these heroes crammed together on this small ship and not a lot of resistance fighters left. And yes, Leia does say we have everything we need and we will keep going, but we don't know what they're going toward. We don't know what's coming next. And I'm not going to get into the behind-the-scenes drama that went on with the Star Wars franchise where no one knew what was happening next because, generally speaking, you don't need to for your stories. I recommend it, but you don't have to. But I think that feeling at the end where Rey doesn't know what's going to happen next, and Poe doesn't know what's going to happen next, and Finn doesn't know what's going to happen next, and none of the characters are really sure where they're going. There's a sense that they have sent out the signal for support, but we haven't seen that actualized. The exception is the broom kid. We have this kid with this broom, and we see that he has the Force, but that doesn't tell us anything about where the characters are going. It tells us something about the world, and that does matter. That is important. From a thematic perspective, that is a fantastic ending for that film, but it doesn't solve any of the problems our main characters were dealing with. Not exactly. It represents something. It represents optimism. It represents the fact that people like Rey can rise from anywhere and still be capable of the Force. But the fact that it isn't connected to what the heroes are going through is why I think there were so many think pieces and articles that mention things like, well, the broom kid must be Luke's son. Get out of here with that. No, you've missed the point. Because the point of that ending is anyone can come from anywhere and still rise up to be a hero. Something that The Rise of Skywalker completely missed. But the problem with the end of The Last Jedi is that the broom kid represents something thematic for the world, and generally represents a sensation that there will be people who hear this message and are inspired by it. And that's good and that's important. It just doesn't help our heroes. We don't really know what they're gonna do next. There's a bit of cognitive dissonance there because it's, on paper, a very optimistic ending. It just didn't read like one to me. It's also important to know where you should end your story. You can definitely do a version of Jaws. I'm gonna keep coming back to Jaws because we've been talking about Jaws a lot during these videos. You can do a version of Jaws where you destroy the shark, the boat sinks, but our main characters are alive, well, the ones who survive, and they swim back to shore, and we can see them come back to town, and we can see them tell people that the shark is dead. We get to see them have a parade. We get to see them reunite with loved ones. We don't need it. Thematically, what's important is that the shark died. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't have an epilogue or a coda or some sort of resolution beyond the climax. That's a unique film in that there's a climax and then mere moments later, the movie's over. And I think, again, it's all about what you send the audience home with. There's a reason that Jaws has a legacy of being the first blockbuster and not a horror movie, even though it definitely is a horror movie. It's because the audience leaves on a high. The audience leaves with that feeling that they have defeated the shark, and then the movie ends and they start rolling credits almost immediately afterward. And it leaves the audience feeling jazzed and excited and ready to take on the world. And that's not nothing. Seven, the other film that we've been talking about a lot in this series of videos, does the opposite. Because it's another one that is, on paper, strangely hopeful, but also pessimistic. But I think in that one it's done on purpose. End of Seven is, the world is a great place and worth fighting for. I agree with the second half. Basically, Morgan Freeman telling us the world is not a great place, but it is worth fighting for. It's a very complicated ending, and definitely the film justifies having a very complex, open to discussion ending. Because the bad guy won. Effectively, the bad guy got everything he wanted. And what the bad guy wanted was to get people talking, to get people thinking about the 7 deadly sins, and about the different things that are and are not considered sins and what to do about them. And the audience leaves that story probably having a very similar conversation, or feeling at least somewhat shaken by what they've witnessed, feeling affected by it. It's not a very forgettable ending. It definitely sticks with you. That final line from Morgan Freeman, it's complicated. It does not make you feel optimistic or hopeful or encouraged, but it does give you some closure. It lets you know that Morgan Freeman is going to stay in his job. He's going to keep doing it. He's going to keep taking down crime. But we don't get an explanation of why. Is it because he realizes that he is necessary? Or is it because his replacement, Brad Pitt, is no longer able to do that job? We don't know. And that's deliberate on the point of the ending. That's what they wanted. It's just a downer. Avatar: The Last Airbender has a terrific ending. It ends with a kiss. And ending with a kiss is never a bad idea. Well, not never, but often not a bad idea. It ends with the main characters all sitting around, hanging out together, enjoying each other's company. Yes, there are things that happen before that. There's big sweeping proclamations from balconies about the state of the future and politics, but that's not what it leaves us with. It leaves us with an intimate moment. It does something similar to what Return of the King does, only, less of it. I'm not going to get into Return of the King, too many endings, all that stuff, doesn't matter. What matters is that an important thing happens in Return of the king gets crowned and the hobbits get bowed to, and then they go home, and they have a quiet moment alone. The ending of Return of the King is very intimate. Avatar: The Last Airbender does the same thing, but shorter. I got one jab in, just one. And then it ends with a kiss, which, again, if you've earned it, not a bad way to go out. Avengers End Game is a terrific movie. I absolutely love that film, and we're going to talk about the ending. So if you haven't seen it, go watch all 23 Marvel movies right now. I'll wait. You should pause the video. I shouldn't wait that long. You should pause the video. Okay, you've seen all 23 Marvel movies, so the ending of Avengers End Game is a terrific ending to the series. It's not the end of the series, and we'll find out eventually whether that was a good idea or not. But what matters is that it is the end for a few characters. Iron Man is given a hero's death, a heroic sacrifice, and then he's given a hero's funeral, and everyone is there from all the movies, or, mostly everyone. A few small conversations happen, resolving some more character conflicts. We get to see Thor, where he's going to go, and what's going to happen with the people of Asgard. And then we get Captain America going on a mission to bring the stones back to their proper place in time. And then he shows up as an old man, because he lived a long life. He did the thing that he was never able to do. He does something that Captain America never is. He does something for himself. Instead of being selfless and putting himself in harm's way, he allows himself to go out with grace. And I understand that some people don't like that ending, and I actually understand why. Because essentially it takes a character who always put others first, who always sacrificed himself, and it gives him a happy ending where he doesn't have to do any of that. It also has complicated implications in that we don't know what he did for 60 years. So did he just watch terrorist attacks happen and wars happen, or did he intervene? We don't know. But I would argue that none of that matters. Because essentially what we see is Tony Stark learns something from Cap. He learns something from their first interactions. He finally learns to sacrifice. He finally learns to be selfless. Cap learns something as well. Cap learns that there is a time and a place for selfless heroism and giving yourself over to the line of duty, but it has to end somewhere. And he finally has the opportunity, which he was never able to take before, to go back and dance with his love. I think that ending only works because those films did such an amazing job setting up Peggy. Actually, the first film did an amazing job setting up Peggy, because they tried to give him his modern-day love interest from the comics, which is her niece Sharon. But it turns out Peggy was too good. So Sharon kind of never felt like the right answer. They give them a kiss in Captain America Civil War, but it's weird. It is weird. And it doesn't feel right, because we know that Peggy is his love. So when he finally gets a chance to, with time travel, go back and live that life, it's not what we would have expected him to do, but it's a wonderful ending to that character. We see them dancing, and we see them kiss, and then we go out. And it leaves me in tears. It's a beautiful ending that gets me because it sends you home not feeling like you've watched people die, even though you have. Not feeling like you've watched a knockdown, drag-out superhero fight, even though you have. It sends you home with relief, with closure, with peace. It sends you home knowing not guessing, knowing that Captain America got to be happy. Do you know how rare that is for Steve Rogers? Do you know how rare it is for movie Steve Rogers to actually be happy? He earned it. We feel that he earned it. And a lot of that comes from the sense of satisfaction we see with old Steve. He's wearing the wedding ring. So we can assume that he comes back after her death. He was with her as long as she was alive. And Falcon asks, do you want to tell me about her? And Steve just says, no. No, I don't think I will. Because he gets to end things on his own terms. He never got to do that before. I think that's beautiful. I think that's an absolutely wonderful ending. And it gives you a sense of closure when you leave the story. Mileage varies on all of these, and I will point out that pretty much half the examples I've given you are for serialized storytelling, which has a lot of considerations. In 2021, I'm going to be working a lot on revisions for my novel, which is the first in a series, and the ending needs some work. Now, I'm extremely proud of the ending I have right now. Kind of. I think it works, but it has been pointed out to me that there are still a lot of questions left hanging. And those questions need to be addressed, but I still think that the way I'm ending the story, at least the final scene we're seeing, I still think that works. I think I just need to add some stuff before it. Remember the story I told you about Robert Rodriguez, the writer, director, and editor. Whenever he gets a note that a scene is not working, he does not address that scene. He changes something that came before it, because everything works like dominoes. My ending doesn't entirely work right now. That just means I need to do some work on what came before. Even though the first draft of my novel was finished 6 years ago, the ending hasn't changed that much. A few of the lines have changed, but the sentiment is still there. It still has a lot of the same notes that it had when an intern read it 6 years ago, when she looked at that last page and she said, I would read this book. And there's some weird stuff on that page. It references things that you would only understand if you'd read the book. That's encouraging, I guess. That feels good. Think about the tone you want your story to end with. Tone tells you a lot. Do you want it to be conflicted? Do you want it to be pump your fist in the air exciting? Do you want to end it with tears, happy or sad? Ending with a kiss is a great way to do that. Watching someone leave, it's a nice way to do that as well. Think about the iconic endings in film or in books. I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship as two characters walk away into the fog. What does that tell you? It gives you a sense of optimism. It gives you a sense that something else is going to happen with these characters. We never need to see it. It doesn't matter. What matters is the note it ends on with the audience. It tells them they're going to be okay. That's it. That's the video. We've talked about Act 1 and Act 2 and their midpoint and Act 3, and now we've talked about endings. Hopefully this series is useful, especially if you're doing NaNoWriMo or any sort of outlining on your story. Even if you're not, I think these are useful things to know. If you're a pantser, it's very helpful to have a sense of structure, even if you're not going to apply it in advance for an outline. Next week, I'm just going to talk about myself and my writing routine and things like that, so tune in for that. Hopefully that will be interesting as well. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed the video, please hit the like button and leave a comment if you have any feedback. What is your favorite ending? That's a wonderful thing that we can talk about in below. Let's try to be mindful of spoilers, and let's also talk about why these endings work. Or if you think of an ending that doesn't work, let's talk about it in the comments. I watched a film with my family a while back called The Shop Around the Corner, which has been adapted to You've Got Mail. And boy, I don't like the end of that film because it ends on a joke that I don't think lands. Or maybe it's not a joke. Maybe it's just a weird thing the main characters say. I don't know. I think it's bad. Let's talk about that in the comments below too. If you want to see more videos, hit the subscribe button and ring that bell. In the meantime, have a happy Thanksgiving. Please be safe. Things are getting pretty wild out there, especially as far as the pandemic goes. Thank you so much for watching. I love you, Victoria.